moderate this session, we have Debanjan Chakrabarti, the director of the East and Northeast British Council. British Council is partnering this session and is an old friend and ally of the Kolkata Literary Meet. And now I hand over the reins of the session to Debanjan da.
Hello. Hi. Namaskar and good afternoon to everyone here. It's fabulous to be here at one of the most striking museums, modern museums in India, on a balmy winter afternoon in Kolkata, on the day of Saraswati Puja, the goddess of words, music, art, with two absolutely amazing authors who I have admired for a long time for the various kinds of writing they do. But first, may I begin by thanking Excite Kolkata Literary Meet, Malavika Banerjee, and Alipur Museum, Dr. Jayanta Sengupta, for creating this amazing platform. What a beautiful and brilliant venue it is. And being in this museum, which memorializes India's freedom struggle, gives our conversation on memories a wonderfully apt setting. So let's dive into the conversation. Geoff Dyer is a novelist, essayist, columnist, and with whom I enjoy the fellowship of the Roger Federer fan club. So welcome, Geoff, and today's conversation will be primarily focused on your book, Homework, memoir. We also have Ananya Vajpeyi, a brilliant academic, researcher, columnist, whose travels across India and the world has birthed her latest book, Place, Intimate Encounters with Cities, which is a veritable cartography of the heart, as one of the critics of your books put it. And both are, what's common between them is the fact that both are absolutely bewitching painters with words. So thank you for being with us. Let me begin with a question for you both. And this is a very interesting tie that binds your works together. Both of you are fascinated with two cities, Venice and Varanasi. What is the stranglehold these two cities have on your memory and on your imagination?
Really? Well, I mean, obviously Geoff has a whole book with both these cities in the title. But I have, for various reasons, which I describe in the book, been going to Venice for the last, I would say, 15 years, almost every year, except during the pandemic. And I have come to love this strange, beautiful, dysfunctional place. And I have many friends there. I've spent some time teaching at the university there, and I go with another Italian research organization. They have annual conferences there, and I usually go and speak there as well. So it's now become some sort of a home for me in Europe, in Italy, and I know it well. Also, incidentally, since we are here, the first time I heard Jhumpa Lahiri speak at all was in Venice at the university and in Italian. So that memory has always stayed with me. And Benares, also, as I describe in the book, I mean, it's a place I've been going since childhood. And now, as a scholar, I go there for research. And yeah, it's one of those places that just fascinates me, confounds me, and keeps pulling me back.
It's a city with which you have very personal connections. You describe your parents, the
Yes,
boat.
yes.
Why don't you share a little bit of that story with the audience?
Do you want me to read it or?
Yeah, you could. I mean, I think it's quite beautiful when they jump off the boat. I mean, yeah. Let's
I'll do
have
that.
a little
I'll
bit
do
of that. Yeah.
Although it's pretty early in the conversation to read, I guess, but anyway. This is the last essay in my book, which has 14 essays. It's called Kashi Karvat. I was in Banaras again. This time I had with me an urn with my mother's ashes and two cousins, both women, slightly younger than me. It was 2 days after my 46th birthday. We stayed in a small hotel, otherwise quite pleasant, except it had a direct view of the burning ghat, Manikarnika. We booked 2 rooms, but in the end slept in one of them, leaving the urn by itself in the other. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, still somewhat cold in mid-February, we took a boat and went out on the Ganga. Take us towards Tulsi Ghat, I said to the boatman, but not close to the bank. My father was a poet. My mother used to say to him, let's go and live in Banaras. You can write your poetry by the banks of the Ganga like Tulsidas. Your poems will be immortal. My father regarded such proposals with deep skepticism. What will you do? He asked her. I will keep a cow, she said, and watch the river go by and listen to you recite your poems and put bananas in the courtyard of the Hanuman temple for the monkeys to partake of. We will grow old together and die in Kashi and attain moksha. My father was not enthusiastic. We can do that here, he said, at home. In the event, they did both die at home, scarcely 3 years apart. There wasn't a cow, but my mother had 2 dogs she loved, and there were monkeys who came to raid her mango tree in the tiny garden in front of the house. I thought the least I could do for my mother was to scatter her ashes in the Ganga at Tulsi Ghat, where she had wanted to live in an idyll of poetry with her beloved, my father. Rose petals, small floating diyas, ashes, into the flowing waters they went. Years later, I decided I would write a book about Tulsidas. This is still in the future. The poet of the epic Ramcharitmanas, who lived in the late 16th and early 17th centuries and died in Banaras. Our first trip to Banaras was when I was a young teenager and my father was making a film for television about the then newly announced Ganga Action Plan inaugurated by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. The dirty river was to be cleaned up at long last with substantial funding from the central government. My father was going for a reconnaissance trip ahead of the TV crew, but my mother wanted him to take us along to see the holy city. It turned into a family holiday. On this trip, I traveled with an urn. This trip. After letting go of my mother's mortal remains, I sat in the gently bobbing boat on the quiet, lightly mist-covered waters of early morning, my 2 cousins wrapped up in shawls, saying nothing. I recalled being on a boat with my parents and my father at some point, tearing off his clothes and jumping into the river. He had grown up swimming in the Betwa, the river of Kannauj, his homeland. He swam with powerful strokes, and I watched transfixed. My mother, though, was impatient. She too stripped down and leapt in after him. Take me with you, she shouted. Don't leave me alone here. They were both in the river, which had a powerful current that was very deep. I took a photograph, which I still have. She's holding onto his arm, her cheek pressed to his shoulder. They're both laughing and waving at me while trying to stay afloat. 30 years later, we took my father's ashes to Prayag. And again my mother got out of the boat in the sandy flats of the Sangam and walked into the water, her sari and her long hair streaming behind her, her whole body taut and twisted with anguish. She looked like a mermaid with seaweed hair. Take me with you, she shouted. Don't leave me alone here. Again I watched from the boat, not afraid. I knew their love would hold them aloft, keep their heads above water and carry them through to safety. This time I did not take a photo. Into the same river they went. He first, upstream, she later downstream with me as their witness. I sat in the boat in a reverie, transported from present death to past life, reversing the arrow of time.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely, enchanting the way you put it, and deeply touching as well. Geoff, Venice and Varanasi.
Yeah, I think I've been to Venice as much as frequently as any city I can think of, and what strikes me about Venice is that however often you go, it never ceases to amaze. It's this mind-blowing place, and you never get jaded with it, even though it's, of course, when we go to places, we often say they're too touristy, it's overrun with tourism. That doesn't apply to Venice, because it's not like there's a real Venice behind it. It's always been this place that's overrun. It's been a major centre of tourism for God knows how long. Anyway, so it's wonderful, it's magical, it's completely incredible. And then, for me, I'll just say this rather briefly. I was writing a little book about Venice when my wife and I happened to go to Varanasi, a city I'd been curious about for very many reasons. And then within about 5 or 10 minutes of being down by the Ghats, I knew instantly that the book I was writing about Venice would just now be half of a book, and it would be, we have this phrase in Britain, maybe you do here, that certain cities are twinned with other cities often in other countries. And it was so obvious that these were twin cities. They were not just twin, they were almost mirror images of each other. I sort of imagine them as being comprising, if you like, there's a single body of water, the Grand Canal in Venice, the Ganges here in India, and I like to think of sort of one bank being Venice and the other bank being Varanasi. And they're so similar, decaying, huge, wonderful palaces, both of which have been, for different reasons, sort of pilgrimage sites, and they both have a particular kind of power. Now, the power of Venice I was very familiar with. I was familiar with its history, and I was familiar with the large body of writing that's been accumulated. Varanasi, on the other hand, was completely mysterious to me, but that just made it even more intoxicating. I guess the other thing I would say about Varanasi is that if you were on Earth you sometimes go to cities for a very short time, and you want to make the most of it. In a way, there's no city I'd recommend on Earth more than Varanasi, because you're seeing something unbelievably beautiful every 10 seconds. But you're also seeing something unbelievably horrible every 10 seconds. So it's that intensity of your experience which is kind of unrivaled, I think.
Geoff, your book, Geoff in Venice, Death in Varanasi, and now Homework, memoir. Why a memoir? Why now? Why so soon? What are the influences? Reading it, I thought of Roald Dahl, a boy, and flying solo, going solo, but that was the second part. And, at least you are very different writers, but you share the similar stature physically. So.
Yes, that's right. I might not be the best writer at this festival, but I'm pretty confident that I'm the tallest. Yes, to go back to my previous point about Varanasi, my hometown, Cheltenham, I would say if you were coming from Mars and you only had a few days to look around Earth, that wouldn't be high up on your list of places to go to. It's not an interesting place at all. But it's the place I was born. And of course, the thing about writing is that it's not a question of how interesting or uninteresting the place or the subject matter is. It's all about the writing. And this is a memoir about my life from 1958, when I was born, to 1977, when I get a place at university and sort of leave home. And the reason I wrote it sort of in my 60s, well, that seems to be a sort of reasonable age to write your memoirs, but in a sense very similar to your passage. I mean, both of my parents were dead, and I don't have any brothers or sisters. You know, there are certain families, I suppose, if you come from a very literary family, there might be a great archive of letters and research materials. If you think of, say, the memoir that Martin Amis wrote about his dad, Kingsley. Kingsley Amis's archive is scattered in research institutes all over the world. The Dyer family archive comprises of about, let's say, a total of 30 letters. So really, I was the sole custodian of this thing. If I didn't write it, nobody would, because, and I know it's not nice when people boast on stage, but I will. There is no doubt at all that I was absolutely the world's leading expert on this topic. In fact, the only expert, because with no brothers and sisters, I mean, really, if I hadn't written this book, then all of these important memories would be gone, actually.
We'll come back to some of those themes in a bit. Ananya, your book is subtitled "An Intimate Encounters with Cities." And in most of the essays, if not all, there is a lurking presence of someone. I mean, either someone whose love you have lost, or you're with someone you love. How difficult or easy is it to dig up these memories of intimacies and loves when you write? Isn't it a bit problematic because there's some other person you're referring to who may not have consented, given his consent at that point of time? I mean,
Gosh. Well, you know, like Geoff, I'm an only child. And I, like Geoff, take that as license to pretty much tell the stories I want to tell, because I'm the only one who can, you know. So many of the people I write about, I lost through the fact that they died, right? And, you know, sometimes you lose somebody when they're still living, which is also kind of death, because, you know, you then live your life subtracted, you know, so as that person, right? You know, this book it's an odd book, I would say, because it was not written as a book, right? So many of these essays were written on different occasions, for different readerships, for, you know, different editors and different publications, different genres, different lengths. Some were more like a travelogue, some were more like, you know, tied to some event, historical event that had happened. Some were about meetings with, for example, major intellectuals who happened to be in the city that I was writing about, etc. So to tie them together, as my publisher and editor, Ritu Menon, suggested, I mean, this was her idea, and she came up with the title. And she already had the title even before we had agreed to make a book together. She felt that there was precisely some thread of both intimacy and loss that she sensed in this scattered set of pieces over the years, and that kind of bound the book together. And then I also, for her, so half of the essays are old and already published or not published ever, and half I wrote for this book, right? So I made a conscious choice to write about people I've been close to, or in some cases, egregiously exclude them from the record. I mean, I'm also a historian,
Yeah,
so I am quite keen on these kinds of maneuvers, and as Joan Didion wrote, I mean, writers are always selling somebody out, so that's part of the game.
We'll come back to the fluidity of genres because that's something that's again common between your writing and Geoff's. Geoff, I mean, how easy or difficult is it to write about intimacies? There's a beautiful passage there where you describe kiss with a girl called Shane in your teens.
Yes, that's well. It's no. I mean, I don't have any problem with. I mean, my parents were very, very private people. That's one of the things they kept saying. I mean, my dad, when we'd go on the rare occasions we'd go on the holidays, he would sort of to a beach. He would sort of wear his sunburn. I mean, he was so obsessively private, and I mean. As a sort of writer, I feel that's not going to help at all. You can't be a private writer, and if you have a very limited imagination, as I do, then all I've got is the experiences that I've had, and from those experiences I can extrapolate and sort of elaborate on them and create stories. So I think there's that, and then I mean, in this case, in the case of the memoir, it's sort of inconceivable that a memoir cannot be intimate in a way. It's an inherently intimate story. And crucially, of course, and this is a cliche, but I'll sort of state it anyway, it's not the same as writing a biography, which has to be objectively researched, all this kind of stuff. It's about your memories, and of course, what can be more intimate than your memories? And there were a few occasions where it's turned out, since the book has been published, that I got things wrong. So I'll just tell you one quick story of this. There's my mum's sister came to visit us with her boyfriend, a self-made millionaire. This was in the 1960s, and they came down to visit us in our small terraced house. And they arrived in his white Rolls Royce. And when I was writing this book, I was conscious that that's an image from quite a lot of films of the 1960s. It's a sort of symbol of social mobility in a changing Britain. Anyways, that was fine. And this is a memory that I have so clearly. When the book came out, my aunt wrote to me and said, this is another sister of my mum's, it wasn't a white Rolls Royce, it was yellow. And I wrote back and said, no, you're wrong, it was white. 10 seconds later, another email comes with a picture of the yellow Rolls Royce. So, factually, if this had been a non-fiction piece for the New Yorker, I'd have had to change white to yellow. But however hard I try, if I shut my eyes and concentrate, and even if you were able to put me into a trance and hypnotize me to going back to my previous to this episode, it was white. So what I'm doing, I can't change it in the text, but I'm going to add a little note with all things like that, where my memory, I feel, is telling an essential truth, which to me is more important than the documented truth.
Geoff, in your in that book, you also dig deep into memories of domesticity, of everyday life in extraordinary detail. I mean, one episode that leaps up to my mind is when you start playing tennis in the backyard and balls are inevitably lost in the neighbor's garden, and how you use the other end of the tennis racket to search for balls. The kind of memory that, most of us growing up in India, especially the boys, I think, play cricket, balls are lost, and you use the other end of the bat to look for the ball. How do you focus on some of these, what would be trivial, and then, make memorable moments out of it?
Yeah, that's the thing, that there's a lot of memories that we all have, and when I was writing the book, I was struck by the way that certain scenes were very powerfully preserved in my consciousness, and I felt the fact that they were preserved like that meant that they had an automatic right of admittance for the book, even though they're of no particular significance. So that would be one thing. I mean, we're all aware when we're reading fiction, they quite often publishers advertise a book as this was an afternoon that would change their lives forever. But a lot of the moments in our lives are not these consequential ones. They're just part of the sort of texture of our lives. And then the other thing is, of course, that, I mean, all writing is always about the detail. So whether you're writing a memoir or you're writing fiction, what you've got to do is substantiate the scenes, make the characters visible, and that's always, always about the detail. You can't have too much detail, and sometimes when you begin writing, it's all rather vague, and then what you're trying to do is to bring it into sharper focus. I did it the other way round, if you like. These scenes, these moments often that were there in a very sort of sharpened way, from them I would sort of build the sort of larger scenes, but the origin was often some particularly vivid moment. But the crucial thing is the whole texture, if you like, the thread count of the narrative has to be as high as possible.
Thank you. I mean, that's a wonderful phrase, thread count of a narrative. Ananya, turning to you and just shifting the theme quite a bit from the intricacies to something as powerful and big in your consciousness as death and bereavement. There's a chapter there on Bangalore where you say you spend a lot of time crying. How do you map sadness onto cities? I mean, how are they correlated?
I was just saying this in another book conversation I had just a few days ago, that if you read this book, you would just really think I was a terminally depressed person, and that I'm just completely kind of, preoccupied with death, with grief, with loss, etc. I don't think that's the case, actually.
No, I don't think that's...
No, yeah, I mean, there's... sometimes it's a mood, and sometimes it's a stance that you have as a writer or an observer or an analyst of the world. Those are the glasses you're wearing. And it may also be a kind of temperament thing, I guess. I mean, I tell you, Geoff was saying that, his parents were very private people, and that there was not much physical, by way of physical artifacts or written record, etc., of what their life was. And so he felt it almost incumbent upon him, right, to be the memoirist of that world that they had created, of which he is the product, in a sense. In my case, it was sort of the opposite, in that I'm also an only child, but my father was a writer and a public intellectual. My parents were both academics. My mother was an activist. And they, in fact, left me a huge library. My father's writings, his literary estate, I ended up giving most of it to the National Archives, and a lot of things are simply out there. My father used to do a lot of television, so many people would recognize him or remember his voice. But there was another life away from that glare of public life, right? Which I got pulled into willy-nilly on account of the kind of people my parents were. And, it's interesting that sometimes when I put the unknown things, the private details, the little flashes of memory, the little kind of pictures in my head, as he was saying, which were well articulated for me, because I put them out there because only I could, as I said. So, for example, in the essay on Bombay, my father first went there as a young man to try and make his fortune as a songwriter. He had a PhD, but he still left Lucknow and he went to Bombay. And he had various adventures there, but
And we had just Javed Saab speaking.
yeah, that's right. So this would have been probably a little earlier, in the early 60s, or around 1960, I would say. Anyway, he had a terrible heartbreak at the end of his studies, which is also partially the reason why he went to Bombay to try and start again with his life, etc. Anyway, ultimately he ended up in Delhi, where he met my mother, and then he married her, and so on. So there was always a story in the three of us about a trunk full of love letters that he had as a bachelor, that he carried everywhere with him, right? And that my mother had heard about, but she never got to see, because by the time he married her, he had disposed of those letters somehow, right? And my mother just thought this was such a shame, because she was not in the least concerned with what they actually said about somebody else, but she was interested in him as a young man before she met him, right? And so was I, of course. So anyway, I wrote something about the tin trunk full of letters, and I just speculated that maybe he left them in Bombay, as another way to turn the page. Yeah. And my editor made me take it out, and she said, it's not appropriate. You cannot speak about, your father's sort of love affairs. And I was like, why not? Who else will speak about them? My mother didn't care. He didn't care. They told me, I am alone now in knowing the story. We don't have the letters. Why can't I write about them? And she said, no, it's off limits. So I had to take out that bit from the story. Of course, I've told it now, so that kind of subverts her plan.
Yeah, but that's great. I mean, I think there are these layers to books and conversations that I think are very, very interesting. Turning to you, Geoff, and again taking this question, yeah? Yeah, that's fine, thanks, yeah. So one of the things that keeps recurring in your book, and Ananya referred to it in passing just now, books, libraries, archives, they are quite prominent in your book. And I'm just thinking of Borges here, who wrote so beautifully about libraries and as dream spaces, as his idea of paradise being a library. So what do libraries, books, artifacts, archives?
Well, I guess the thing is, if you grow up in a house without any books, which was the case for me, and then just because of a teacher at my school when I was about 14, let's say, I sort of changed. I got into reading, and gradually I acquired some books, and then after I'd left university and after I became a writer, there was what happened is this thing of going to university. I ended up going to Oxford and leading a life very different to my parents. And so books had this sort of magical sort of power to my parents. They never read books, but they were aware they had this power. So for my 21st birthday, I came home from Oxford. And by then, my life was really starting to become very different to my parents. And my dad had paid to have this cake. My dad, who never liked paying for anything, he was just never spent money, really. He paid to have this cake decorated in the shape of an open book. And the bookmark down the middle had the initials CCC, Corpus Christi College, of my Oxford College. So this weirdly unreadable but certainly not inedible cake became this incredibly poignant symbol of both the power of books and also the thing that would ultimately put this great separation from my parents. And then when I got older and became a writer, all of in this house that had no books at all, and it started to fill up the living room, fill up with books. They were all by me, and it became this weird sort of altar, almost like you'd have, I'd guess, in sort of religious households where they would sort of worship it, these books, even though they weren't quite sure what God it was they were worshipping, but they felt it was a very powerful one because it could mean, for example, that you could earn a living without working, you could get paid to travel the world, and my parents both died without ever having been on an aeroplane, and it was all about books really, but as a result of that, books became, there was a poignance about it too.
And to speak about books as altar on a day like this, when here we do worship books on an altar, this is the day. We'll go out for questions. 2 questions. There's a hand up in the back there. Yeah.
I had a question for Geoff Dyer. So the book you wrote just before Geoff in Venice, Death in Varanasi, was sort of inspired by Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night, right? And this one obviously alludes to Mann's book and Visconti's film adaptation of it. So was this literary spectre that frames both these books in quick succession? Was this something that you were conscious of at the time and wanted to render distinct? Or when you were framing the title, did you realize it was somehow proleptic?
Oh, it was there, in both cases, it was there right from the start. I went to Paris in order to write what I thought was going to be a version of Scott Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night. And back then I was a young sort of cool writer, so there's all sorts of quotations from Hemingway in that book. But because I was a cool young writer, I didn't call them quotations, I called them samples, which I thought was really cool. Now it seems rather pretentious. And the second book, Geoff in Venice, Death in Varanasi, right from the start, the novella I was going to write was going to be it has the same first sentence almost as Death in Venice, and it was going to be a version of Death in Venice set during the Venice Biennale. So you're absolutely right on both accounts. I think in a way, if you're not very good at inventing plots, then in a way these prior books serve as a kind of template in the same way that maybe myths can do in a different culture. So thank you for that excellent question.
Second question, is it for Ananya? I would prefer, yeah. Could we have a question for Ananya? We have time for just 2 questions. Okay, off you go.
The question for Ananya also.
Right, thanks.
Can answer me question.
What is the purpose of life if it ends with death?
Wow, I'm glad that's a question for Ananya, because I'm quite keen on learning the answer myself. What is it? In 10 words or less.
What is the purpose? What do you mean? Like whose purpose? Purpose suggests that it's by design and that somebody has something to achieve from putting you on this earth for as long as you're here. That's an unknown, isn't it? And yeah, I think that, most of what growing up is about or growing old is about, I think, is just becoming more and more conscious of the end that is approaching. You know, when you're very young, you have no sense of the limit of the future. I think you have no sense of, your trajectory as being a finite one. You just have you're just full of life, that's it. And just learning to see this as a finite period of time that you have at your disposal is what constitutes, at least I think for a writer, that is something that is central to their journey, you know. It's also probably why you write. I mean, my father always used to say, I don't know who he was quoting, but he used to say, all artists protest against death. And so I'm quoting him,
That's
quoting
really,
somebody.
really powerful. Jeff, your
It's the very it's
Maybe
the very
Sartre or somebody like that.
maybe it's the very fact that it ends with death that constitutes its purpose. So I'm very, from the time I first came across Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence, I was very taken with that as a way of countering the Christian idea that what you do in this life doesn't matter, because what does 70 years of suffering matter in the face of an eternity of salvation? So it really doesn't matter how miserable you are and how much you forego, because it's the afterlife that's important. So Nietzsche had this idea of the eternal recurrence, and he said, what about this? That actually this life, as you leave it, you'll lead over and over again throughout all eternity, in every detail, he says. And he says, wouldn't that be a terrible thought? Because, I mean, I've been rather sick this afternoon, and if I'm leading this life over and over again, much as I'm having a good time talking to you all now, I'm really not looking forward to reliving the last 12 hours. But then he says, but have there been moments in your life so wonderful that the thought of living them over and over again throughout all eternity, that is a wonderful idea. And I think that kind of thing, it really makes you aware that you're only here for a short time and you really, really want to make the most of it without any idea of kind of some sort of theological rewards in the afterlife, because the chances are that the moment you die, that's the absolute end of it, I think, anyway.
Thank you, Geoff. Thank you, Ananya. And ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for these two brilliant authors.
Thank you.
Thank you for being